Namibia's new and first female president has made history against the United States now, and it has Donald Trump on the edge. He slammed the doors on Africans. For years, the United States humiliated African citizens with endless visa delays, denials, and disrespect, all while enjoying VIP access to the continent, with no visa required. Americans could fly into African countries like they owned the skies. No questions, no queues, no shame. But that era is ending, and Namibia just made it official.
In a surprising turn of events that has sent shockwaves through the political arena, Namibia's newly elected president, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, has taken a bold stand that could reshape the relationship between the US and African nations. What does this mean for over 500 American citizens currently in Namibia? Today, we dive deep into this groundbreaking immigration policy change that now requires US nationals to obtain visas to enter Namibia. This isn't just an administrative hassle, it's a declaration of sovereignty and reciprocity that echoes around the globe. With the deportation of these Americans already underway, this development raises crucial questions about international diplomacy, fairness, and the privileges once taken for granted by US citizens abroad. So, what's behind this surprising move? And what could it mean for American travelers and diplomats in Africa? Stick around as we break down this significant diplomatic shift. But first, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more updates, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss any of our in-depth analyses of global events. Let's explore the implications of Namibia's new policy and see how it reshapes our understanding of international relations. Right now, the deportation order has caught the attention of former President Donald Trump, whose administration perpetuated a narrative of American exceptionalism and privilege abroad. Now, Trump finds himself in unfamiliar territory, grappling with diplomatic fallout from an African nation asserting its rights. This article delves into the multifaceted implications of Nandi-Ndaitwah's bold immigration policy, the deportation of numerous American citizens, the possible repercussions for US foreign policy, and what this entire episode reveals about the evolving relationship between Africa and the West. A historical policy change. The policy sanctioned by President Nandi-Ndaitwah marks a historic moment in Namibia's leadership and a critical juncture in African diplomacy. Since its independence from colonial rule in 1990, Namibia has fostered diplomatic relationships with various nations. However, the US has long enjoyed an unequal advantage that has not gone unnoticed by its African counterparts. Prior to this policy change, American tourists and expatriates had the enviable privilege of entering Namibia without the burden of visas. In stark contrast, Namibians seeking to enter the United States faced arduous challenges, lengthy wait times, invasive background checks, and the ever-present risk of rejection. The juxtaposition of ease for Americans against hardship for African travelers has been a painful narrative of double standards and systemic inequality. President Nandi-Ndaitwah's announcement effectively reverses the status quo. Beginning April 1st, 2025, American nationals will face the same visa scrutiny that has long been the reality for many Namibians. This decision compels diplomats and citizens alike to reckon with the historical imbalances that have shaped the international order. When President Nandi-Ndaitwah declared, "If Africans need visas to enter America, then Americans will need visas to enter Namibia," she wasn't simply iterating a policy change. She was making a definitive statement about dignity, respect, and equality among nations. This moment resonates with a growing sentiment in Africa that the time has come to move away from the remnants of exploitation and embrace a new era of mutual respect and understanding. The deportation order? Why? Who? The wave of deportations that followed this policy announcement is significant in its scope and implications. The government targeted over 500 Americans who flouted Namibian immigration laws, many of whom overstayed their permits or entered the country without the required documentation. Reports indicate that these individuals ranged from tourists to employees working in key sectors such as mining and resource extraction. The mining industry is vital to Namibia, as the country is rich in minerals like uranium, diamonds, and rare earth metals, resources that play a crucial role in the global economy. However, the influx of foreign workers operates within a complex framework of legal and illegal status, often leading to cases of exploitation and underhanded work practices that do not benefit the local populace. The studies revealed that many deportees had slipped through the cracks of the immigration system, relying on lax enforcement from previous administrations. For years, the express lack of accountability enabled Americans to enjoy unrestricted privilege while local citizens struggled under stringent immigration regulations. The message Nandine Ndaitwah's administration is sending is clear. The days of ignoring legal frameworks will no longer be tolerated. In her speeches regarding the crackdown on illegal immigration, she emphasized that no nationality is above the law. The decision to deport these individuals is rooted in a commitment to uphold the principles of justice and fairness, not merely for Namibians but for all who enter the country. President Nandine Ndaitwah knows that this is a pivotal moment to advocate for the dignity of her people, reminding the world that Namibia will no longer be a playground for foreign privilege. Trump's response. The fallout from this widespread deportation was immediate and impactful, reaching the highest echelons of the American political world. Trump, whose presidency was marked by an assertive nationalistic agenda, finds himself in an uncomfortable predicament. How should one approach an African leader determined to impose rights and regulations that challenge the American narrative? As news of the deportation circulated, many U.S. officials reflected on the foreign policy implications of Namibia's actions. Trump's administration faces a dilemma. Responding with anger could amplify tensions and escalate hostilities, while a softer approach may undermine the traditional perception of American power. As of now, U.S. diplomats are scrambling to negotiate an appropriate response that does not appear weak nor retaliatory. The potential for a diplomatic backlash exists. American leaders may contemplate using economic sanctions or changing the terms of aid provided to Namibia, a strategy effectively used to pressure nations into line in the past. However, with a growing swell of Pan-African nationalism and dignity, such tactics may backfire, provoking a broader movement across the continent toward anti-Western sentiment and requests for fair treatment. The international implications beyond U.S.-Namibia relations. The ramifications of Namibia's bold policy change extend far beyond the immediate relationship between Windhoek and Washington. The ripple effects triggered by Nandine Ndaitwah's leadership could inspire other nations on the African continent to assert their rights and reject diplomatic double standards, fostering a new narrative for international relations. Consider nations like Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa, all of which face similar inequalities in their diplomatic relationships with the United States and other Western countries. Should Namibia's actions succeed in altering perceptions and privileges, it won't be long before others embark on their own journeys of sovereignty, demanding equal treatment for their citizens. This shift is not merely reactive. It builds on a growing sentiment among African leaders and citizens who recognize the urgent need for cooperation grounded in mutual respect. It invites a reevaluation of what solidarity and partnerships mean in the context of shared history, and a future where empowerment is the norm rather than the exception. Reciprocal democracy, a new call to action. As seen, President Nandine Ndaitwah's approach emphasizes not only the immediate political and diplomatic effects, but also a profound philosophical shift in how nations should engage with one another. This call for reciprocity is critical in establishing more robust, long-term relationships built on trust and respect. What is evident is that the time-worn paradigms of diplomatic relations are being questioned, if not dismantled entirely. African nations are growing weary of being treated as mere recipients of foreign aid and investment, rather than partners in their own development. The new visa policy serves as a tangible blueprint for establishing expectations of equality. By creating a system that holds all countries accountable, no nation can expect preferential treatment while denying it to others. Background checks, visa applications, and the rigorous scrutiny that defines the experience of many African travelers will now apply indiscriminately, making diplomacy a two-way street. As President Nandi Ndaitwah emphasizes the need for mutual respect in her governmental approach, the question emerges: how many other leaders will be emboldened to follow suit? The answer has the potential to reshape African relations on a global stage, asserting that Africa's identity must be respected and its legitimacy acknowledged. The reaction from Western allies: support or retaliation? In light of growing global tensions, the reactions from Western allies remain a mixed bag of support, confusion, and envious consideration. On one hand, certain countries and international bodies may view Namibia's move as a progressive step toward equitability. On the other hand, financial and political ramifications loom, complicating diplomatic efforts. For many Western nations, especially those with historical ties to Africa, the shift in dynamics calls for a concerted response that reconciles modern diplomatic expectations with the legacies of colonialism. Diplomats in Washington and European capitals can no longer ignore rising anti-imperialist sentiments that challenge the status quo. Some nations might take the leap of supporting Namibia's call for reciprocal diplomacy, especially with a strong populist component that resonates deeply with local constituencies. However, economic repercussions tied to trade and aid relationships may also come into play. Countries that refuse to acknowledge Namibia's sovereignty could risk alienating themselves further from promising partnerships. This multifaceted interplay of support versus retaliation is one that will be closely monitored by diplomats, scholars, and citizens alike. The economic ramifications: navigating the fallout. The economic landscape is likely to shift in response to Namibia's assertive stance. Namibia has historically received significant financial support, particularly from the US, for development projects related to healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The American withdrawal from or alteration of these aid programs in retaliation against Namibia could significantly impact both the government and the populace. Consider this: the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID funds, have historically supported thousands of Namibians and contributed to important public health initiatives, educational programming, and agricultural efforts. Cutbacks could have immediate and profound effects on the Namibian economy, particularly hurting vulnerable communities that rely heavily on U.S. assistance. Yet, the crux of the matter is one of self-determinism and the commitment to standing firm in the face of potential economic reprisal. President Nandi Ndaitwah seems prepared to accept the backlash, articulating that real dignity cannot be compromised, and reclaiming Namibia's sovereignty is paramount. Moreover, the shifting economic dynamics may prompt Namibia to seek opportunities beyond Western ties. Developing alliances with countries like China, Russia, and other emerging economies could pave the way for a more diversified economic landscape that reduces dependency on traditional Western powers. This potential pivot can redefine global economic interactions, particularly for African nations looking to assert itself as equal partners in the international arena, navigating challenges and opportunities. As the reverberations of this policy change settle, both Namibia and the United States face a new reality that requires careful navigation. For Namibia, continued diplomatic engagement will be essential to solidify relationships with other nations, both within Africa and globally. Balancing the immediate pressures of diplomatic backlash against the long-term vision of self-governance will require a strategic approach. Should the U.S. retaliate economically, Namibia may need to pivot swiftly, forming partnerships with nations that share a commitment to equality. The emergence of new allies could lead to increased trade and investment opportunities, potentially offsetting any loss of U.S. aid, while simultaneously demonstrating that Namibia is capable of standing alone. Notably, the power of international solidarity should not be underestimated. Other nations may rally around Namibia's cause, recognizing that these actions could represent a watershed moment in which African nations collectively insist on equal treatment. Should successful outcomes arise from this newfound assertiveness, the potential for broader systemic change grows. For the United States, the challenge lies in reconceptualizing its long-standing approach to foreign relations. An insistence on power dynamics and entitlement may no longer see effortless compliance. Rather, American leadership may need to pivot toward cooperative frameworks that foster mutual interests for the future. President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah's decision to require visas from U.S. nationals and order the deportation of over 500 Americans is more than an administrative maneuver. It symbolizes an important turning point in the relationship between Africa and the West. It is a moment when the narrative moves from one of subservience to one of equality, dignity, and mutual respect. As Namibia leads by example, asserting that reciprocity is a fundamental expectation in international relations, other African nations may follow suit, creating a collective call for a more equitable global framework. If the U.S. continues to engage without recognizing the changing tides of diplomacy, it risks further alienating itself from partners that have much to offer. In this new landscape of reciprocal diplomacy, if Namibia can assert its sovereignty and dignity, what will prevent other nations from following its example? The challenge for the interconnected global community is to embrace this moment as a catalyst for change, a recognition that each country's worth is derived from its rights, its culture, and its voice. As the world watches how this drama unfolds, one thing is clear: Namibia's bold stance is a clarion call for nations everywhere. Dignity cannot be deferred, and fairness can no longer be an elective. It must be the standard by which all international relations are judged. The balance of power is shifting. Namibia is leading the charge, and the implications are likely to reverberate long into the future, reshaping the relationships between not just Africa and the West, but the entire world.